All right, so how do we do this one? We have 4i in parentheses to the third power. So remember what that is. So that third power means 3 of them, doesn't it? So it means 4i, 4i, 4i. We good there? That's just what a third power means. And then you just multiply this over 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. Just use your calculator. 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. I to the third power. That's pretty simple, right? But then the question is, what in the world do we do with I to the third power? Like, what is that? What's I to the third power? How do we handle that? Well, here's what you want to do with I to the third power, if you happen to have that. Think of it as I to the I squared and one more I, right? Because that's third power. Now, why would I do that? Well, because remember what I squared is? What do we do anytime we have I squared? I squared is plain -1, remember? The 2 power removes the root. You remember the logic on that? Let me show you real quick. Maybe it's worth a second of your time. What's the square root of -1? Remember what negatives do? They kick out an I, so it's I square root of 1. And what's the square root of 1? 1, so 1 times I. So my point is, square root of -1 is I. And then why I care so much about that is because that allows me to then find out what I squared is, because if you square both sides, a little scribbly there, you square both sides, you see I squared, the 2 power removes the root, is -1. So there it is, a little quick proof that I squared is -1. So whenever we see I squared, like this I squared right here, we replace it with -1. And then there's an I out there, and so this is -64i. Did you see that? Let me track with this one more time. Third power means 3 of them. Multiply the numbers, get 64. I and 3 i's make I cubed. Now, what do we do with I cubed? You realize that's I squared and 1 more I. And I squared, as we showed over here, is just plain old -1. We never leave I squared. We replace it with plain old -1, and then -1 times 64 is -64. The I is just sitting there at the back. So it's -64i. There we go.